9. Lots of Lego. The Tokyo Express cargo ship was on its way to New York from Europe. Just as it entered the Atlantic Ocean, 20 miles from the UK's coast on February 13, 1997, it tipped to one side, causing 62 shipping containers to tumble into the water. One of the containers was filled to the brim with Lego, and over the next 25 years, bricks and minifigures have been washing up on the surrounding area's shores ever since. The Legos usually don't even look like they've been in the sea at all, staying in good condition despite being tossed by the waves. After the spill, many people combed the beach for pieces, especially since there were some rare figures lost like green dragon figurines, worth a much higher value than their black counterparts. One of these collectors is Tracy Williams, who's still noticing the toys washing up to this day. She's also found other lost items and uses her finds to show the impact plastic has on our seas and oceans. Tracy has even done a comparison of 2 Lego base plates from 1997, one from a box and another that's been inside the sea for 25 years. Aside from a small amount of marine life, the pair were basically identical. Experts at the University of Plymouth have estimated that it would take between 100 to 1,300 years for the plastic to start breaking down. It's not just Cornwall where Lego has reappeared. Pieces have also been found in Wales, Kent, Guernsey, and County Kerry and Ireland. Some even made it to the Netherlands. Have you ever seen Legos on your beach? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit subscribe while you're there. 8. The tour boat Phoenix. In July 2018, a Thai tourist boat called the Phoenix set off from Phuket to the island resort of Koh Ratcha. There were 101 people on board, 89 of them being tourists. Normally, this would be a routine voyage, but the weather and sea conditions had recently picked up. As a result, ships were urged by authorities to avoid travel. The boat made it to Koh Ratcha with no issue, but on the return journey, the ship was hit by massive waves, causing it to flip over and capsize. Those on board scrambled to get to lifeboats, but many were trapped in the hull as it overturned. Sadly, 44 people were killed in the sinking, with 3 others still unaccounted for. The loss produced a public apology from Prime Minister General Prayut Chan-o-cha to China, since most of the passengers were Chinese, as well as those who visited to meet the survivors in Phuket. The owner of the vessel was also charged with negligence for continuing travel despite warnings. The Phoenix rested at 147 feet underwater for months after the incident. Eventually, in November that year, it rose from the seabed. The boat is now covered in brown and green marine life and plant growth, despite its short time underwater compared to other wrecks. Hopefully, the recovery has helped bring closure to many families affected by this disaster. 7. Sea Angels. Sea angels are glowing creatures with soft fluttering wings and long draping gowns. They move gracefully through water as if they're flying and have captivated ocean explorers for years. It might sound like we're talking about some sort of mythological creature, but sea angels are actually real. They're a type of shellless sea snail, but this doesn't make them any less fascinating. The most common types are scientifically referred to as Clione lamachina and Clione antarctica. They're pretty small, growing only about 1.5 to 3 inches in length. Part of the reason these creatures are so beautiful is the fact that they're slightly transparent, giving them a glowing appearance. To add to this, because their skin is see-through, their internal organs are visible to the naked eye with a beautiful orange and pink color. Something not quite as heavenly though is the sea angel's diet. They eat sea butterflies, which are another type of sea snail. They can pluck one out of its shell and eat it whole within 2 minutes. A fact that is a bit more beautiful is the mating ritual of sea angels. Already a stunning sight while swimming on their own. When 2 sea angels mate, they swim around together for hours, swirling like ballroom dancers. They also switch gender as they age, starting out as males and then turning into females with time. 6. Rubber ducks. Rubber ducks are normally reserved for bathtub time, but in 1992, the loss of a cargo ship container filled with 28,000 of them and other bath toys means you can now find small yellow toys floating across the ocean. Although the ducks were originally sent to the US from China, They were meant to be in stores instead of washing up on beaches. They've even ended up on the Atlantic beaches of Maine. One man who started tracking the toys is named Donovan Hahn, a journalist who's now written a book about his experience. Some of the ducks were even picked up in remote parts of Alaska at a site called Gore Point. This spot is so far removed that the operation to get rid of ducks and other plastic waste took months, and the resulting haul had to be airlifted away. The effects of plastic in our oceans, like the rubber ducks, is an ongoing issue that concerns many scientists and governments around the world. But there is a silver lining when it comes to these friendly floaties. Schools use the story of the duckies to help kids learn about ocean movements. They even track where the toys are now. 5. Brinacles. Brinacles are also called ice fingers of death, and it's easy to see why they got this nickname. These long shards of ice shoot down into the ocean like the sharp claws of some sort of monster. First discovered in the 1960s, brinacles are a rare natural occurrence that only happens if conditions are just right in the planet's cold polar regions. Ice on the water's surface begins to snake down to the seabed, creating an underwater icicle of sorts. This happens because the makeup of sea ice is much different from ice in your freezer. Ice on the ocean's surface is made of two components. The ice crystal itself is pretty pure, since the freezing process removes most of the water's salt. Because salt water freezes at a much lower temperature than pure water, the residual seawater remains in a liquid state, forming salty brine pathways inside the porous ice block, like veins through a body. When cracks occur, the salty water leaks out. Since it's denser than the water around it, it sinks to the bottom, freezing as it goes. The brinacle will then seep across the seabed, freezing everything it touches in a river of ice. Marine life isn't even safe when a brinacle forms, and often creatures like starfish and sea urchins end up trapped in icy clutches. So, when you think about it, Ice Fingers of Death is a fitting name. 4. The mysterious object in the Baltic Sea. In 2011, Swedish treasure hunters called the Ocean X team made a surprising discovery at the bottom of the Baltic Sea. The object sitting on the seafloor had steps seemingly carved into it with an alien design. Some of these sonar images taken at the site make it look like a spaceship, similar to the Millennium Falcon. One of the explorers, Peter Lindbergh, kept the location of this object secret, but had interesting theories as to what it was. He believed that if it was man-made, then it must have been created before the last ice age, over 20,000 years ago. The fact that it's underwater then suggests that it could be an artifact from the mythical city of Atlantis. Details and images have been shared with scientists and experts, and many are left perplexed. Geologists have ruled out its formation by a volcano, although others have their own theories. Some scientists have been unable to offer an opinion, since the samples provided by the Ocean X team were not enough to work with, being composed mainly of sandstone, granite, and gneiss. The sonar image also doesn't give them too much to go on, since the quality is too low to give definitive answers. The prevailing belief of experts is that this is simply a rock shaped by the glacial deposits of the Ice Age, which coincidentally makes it look like a man-made structure. But without further dives being conducted at the site to get better imagery and samples, who knows for sure? 3. The sunken city of Daka. Indian civilization was always believed to have emerged between 3,000 and 6,000 years ago. But the discovery of artifacts from the lost city of Daka have changed this. Historians now say it could have started 9,000 to 15,000 years ago. According to the Mahabharata epic, Krishna created the city of Daka to avoid wars with Jarasandh, a rival king. The city was said to be full of opulent palaces made of silver and gems. With advanced architecture and city planning, including a network of connected streets with temples and marketplaces, it was a city unlike any other. The Marine Archaeological Unit of India started underwater excavations near Lotha in 1988 after finding pottery that predated the Indus civilization. They thought this might be a good place to hunt for the City of Legend. Although they found artifacts like jewelry and 3,500-year-old crumbling structures, a group of students found the most promising evidence. At the Gulf of Cambay, below a depth of 70 feet, they found a street network with sandstone walls, large pieces from structures, and copper coins. The artifacts were tested and over 9,500 years old. Further discoveries led scientists to the conclusion that they actually found the city of Dwaka and that Indian civilization went further back than anyone first believed. But how did such an amazing city get lost under the waves? Experts have ruled out an earthquake or tsunami, but that leaves two other theories. Either there was a change in the seabed's height, or the sea level underwent a rapid rise, swallowing the city whole. The latter of the two explanations is more believable, since a similar event happened in Bahrain around the same time. 2. The bubbles of Cascadia. You'd probably expect sparkling water inside a champagne glass, but not at the bottom of the ocean. But bubbly water is plentiful in the Pacific Ocean's Cascadia Fault, thanks to a phenomenon known as cold seeps. The bubbles formed might look fun, but they're made of methane gas. Cold seeps are identified by methane bubble streams that travel through seabed sediment. There are about 1,000 confirmed methane jacuzzis along the fault, covering about 497 miles. The large amount of gas is caused by the area's extreme tectonic activity, which increases the gas's production. You may think that this would make every living creature want to avoid the area like the plague, but there are some species of marine life able to thrive in the conditions the Cascadia Fault provides, some of which you can't find anywhere else in the world. Tube worms, mussels, barnacles, crabs, rockfish, anemones, and clams are among the new animal groups found at the cold seeps. Although it may seem like a steady stream of methane gas would be bad for the environment, the impact of these sites is minimal. It's all thanks to microbes living in the sediment of the fault and many others around the globe. The microbes absorb and use methane as food with a process called chemosynthesis, which means that by digesting the gas, they can create different chemical compounds, which not only provide an environment for other species to thrive in, but also a filter so the methane is contained. 1. The oldest intact shipwreck. In October 2018, archaeologists discovered something they thought had been lost to the history books. Lying at the bottom of the Black Sea, 1.2 miles below water, was an ancient Greek ship, the likes of which had only been seen on artifacts like the Siren vase inside the British Museum. Even though it was deep underwater, the ship's condition left researchers like Professor John Adams and his team at the Black Sea Maritime Archaeology Project stunned. The ship measured about 75 feet in length and still had its mast, rudders, and the rowing benches once used by sailors still all in one piece. What makes this all the more remarkable is that the vessel is believed to be around 2,400 years old. The depth of the ship was found to have contributed massively to keeping it intact. Researchers found low levels of oxygen near the site because of how far down the vessel is, which would have meant marine life and bacteria would not be able to survive and consume the wood. Although there are no plans to raise the merchant ship from the seabed anytime soon, its discovery will continue to help us to understand more about shipbuilding and seafaring in the ancient world. Thanks for watching. Which one of these underwater finds were you surprised by?
10. Dinosaur footprints. As the waters of the Baltic Sea River rapidly receded during a severe drought in Texas in 2022, a collection of 113-million-year-old fossilized dinosaur footprints appeared on the dried limestone riverbed for the first time in over 2 decades. The tracks belong to several species that lived during the early Cretaceous period. Most were made by a dinosaur that walked on 2 legs, called the Acrocanthosaurus. These 3-toed creatures were around 15 feet tall and weighed up to 7 tons. That may sound pretty big, but the Acrocanthosaurus was small compared to some of the ancient reptiles it lived alongside. The Sauroposeidon, which also left behind footprints, was about 60 feet tall and weighed about 44 tons. In addition to the tracks that scientists already knew about, the recent dry spell allowed them to discover more. Paleontologist Louis Jacobs told the New York Times that many of the footprints are typically filled in with sediment and underwater. which helps to protect them from erosion but keeps them hidden from view. He described the tracks as spectacular for their depth and detail, but conceded that some of them may wear away with time, while others will become discoverable for the first time. 9. Danube River shipwrecks. In 2022, Serbia suffered its worst drought in decades, along with most other European countries. Water levels in the Danube River plunged to their lowest in nearly 100 years, exposing more than a dozen long-forgotten World War II-era German shipwrecks near the town of Prahovo. The ships were identified as members of the Nazis' Black Sea Fleet. They were scuttled in 1944 to prevent them from falling into the hands of the advancing Red Army. After intentionally sinking the vessels, the Germans retreated from the region. The wrecks took 10,000 unexploded weapons with them to the riverbed, leaving behind a hazardous mess that Serbian authorities estimate will cost $30 million to clean up. Officials said they expected more ships to appear as the drought continued with no foreseeable end. 8. Hunger stones. During an unusually hot and dry summer in 2018, bitter reminders of past droughts emerged along the Elbe River in the northern Czech Republic. Known as hunger stones, these etched boulders mark record-low water levels of the past. At least a dozen of them appeared in the town of Decin, with the oldest visible date reading 1616. Some hunger stones contained other information. One inscription mentions a poor harvest, a food shortage, rising prices, and hunger among the poor. Etched in German, it also reads, "When you see me, weep." Researchers have identified traces of even older inscriptions linked to other historical droughts, including in 1417 and 1473. These troubling monuments also bear records of 10 droughts that occurred between 1707 and 1893. Near the German town of Bleckede, there's a hunger stone that reads, "When this goes under, life will become more colorful again," serving as a reminder of the strife that past generations experienced. More and more hunger stones are turning up as droughts seem to only worsen, and they're being found in numerous countries. Along with their emergence, much of Europe has struggled with disrupted shipping, food shortages, and a dwindling supply of drinking water in recent years. 7. The lost village of Burg. In 1914, the central German village of Burg was abandoned and flooded during the creation of what's now the country's third largest reservoir. During a drought in 2018, authorities drained the reservoir to ensure that the water levels of the nearby Weser River remained high enough for shipping activities to continue uninterrupted. The ruins of Burg reappeared. Nicknamed among locals as the Atlantis of Lake Ader, Burg was originally built around a former 12th century Benedictine convent that had been dissolved after the Reformation period. By the time the population was evacuated for the creation of the dam during the early 20th century, less than 200 people were living there. Over the last 100 years or so, Burg's remains have appeared on a handful of occasions when water levels plunged below normal, revealing the foundation of what was once the village's wall, a stone bridge, burials, and the crumbling ruins of the convent and old ironworks. The structures aren't very recognizable, but they're clearly man-made, standing as a testament to a bygone era when the area was filled with solid buildings and sprawling farms. 6. Oero. When Spain's Alto Lindoso Reservoir was created along the Lima River in 1992, residents of 4 villages were displaced from their properties. The 120 people who lived in Oero fought to stay in their homes, but no amount of complaining or protesting convinced the government to reconsider its decision to flood the town. Some locals even staged a hunger strike, but there was ultimately nothing they could do to stop their 70 homes from being submerged. They relocated their church and reburied the deceased, and all that was visible of Oero until recent years was a lone rooftop sticking out of the water. In 2022, the country's Galicia region saw its lowest water levels since the reservoir was built. Oero was suddenly on dry land again, drawing curious visitors and former residents. For those who once lived in the village, seeing its ruins stirred deep emotions. Local resident Francisco Villalonga, who watched the waters rise firsthand, told All That Is Interesting that he can understand why visitors might find the crumbling village interesting, but he also said that it was difficult to look at for those who grew up in the homes that were taken away from them. 5. Neros Bridge. During Nero's reign as Rome's fifth emperor from 54 to 68 AD, he commissioned the construction of numerous public structures in his efforts to rebuild the empire after a catastrophic fire. In 2022, the ruins of a stone bridge, thought to be one of the controversial ruler's projects, emerged from the Tiber River. Dubbed the Pons Neronianus, or the Bridge of Nero, the first-century structure has appeared at least a handful of times during past droughts. Experts are admittedly unsure whether Nero built the bridge. It may have been constructed before his rise to power, and is most likely a reconstruction of a previous crossing that once sat in its place, according to archaeologist Nick Temple. Archaeologist Robert Coates Stevens told Live Science that the bridge would have probably provided Rome's wealthier residents with easy access to lavish gardens and properties Nero built near the Vatican. But scholars say its original location along a tight riverbed is poorly chosen due to the likelihood for the waters cutting through the sediment to separate the riverbanks from the structures holding the bridge in place. Evidence suggests that this may have actually happened to Nero's bridge, most likely during the 3rd century. The structure was taken apart and reassembled in a more ideal location, where what's left of it remains today. Researchers believe that the bridge may have held some religious or military significance, but it was built in a time and place where not much was going on in the immediate area. Now, many would prefer for it to stay out of sight altogether, since it's only visible during drought conditions. 4. Zello. In 2022, a World War II-era barge that normally sits underwater in Italy's largest river became visible. Known as the Zello, the 164-foot-long vessel was used for transporting wood and other supplies up and down the 405-mile-long Po River, which runs between the Alps and the Adriatic Sea. It sank off the town of Gualtieri during an Allied bombardment in 1943. Photographer Alessio Bonin told The Guardian that the Zello's bow became increasingly visible in recent years. The Po River's water level dropped so dramatically, and in such a short time, that nearly the entire vessel was visible before the end of winter in early 2022. 3 months later, it continued to tower over the surrounding water. By then, Italy hadn't seen rain in over 100 days and was experiencing a 70% decrease in snowfall. The lack of precipitation and unusually high temperatures accelerated the plummeting water levels more than a conventional drought would, leading many to fear how much worse things will get in coming years as climate change worsens. Some people are even worried that the Po River could dry up, depriving the region of its most important waterway. For this reason, the reappearance of the Zello was more concerning than exciting, despite its historic value, and at this point, its disappearance would be a welcome sight. 3. Spanish Stonehenge. Between 4,000 and 7,000 years ago, ancient people living in what is now Spain built a massive megalithic monument consisting of around 140 boulders arranged in a concentric circle. Officially named the Dolmen of Guadalperol, and perhaps better known by the nickname the Spanish Stonehenge, the site most likely functioned as a cemetery or a temple, or for some other spiritual or ritualistic purpose. The dolmens were submerged in 1963 during the creation of the Valdecañas Reservoir. For years, the area's younger residents only ever saw the tops of structures peeking out from the water's surface, leaving them curious about the landmark their elders spoke of. They finally got their wish to see the site in its entirety during a drought in 2019. when the reservoir's receding waters exposed the dolmens for the first time in decades. Built from highly porous stone, the megaliths bore obvious signs of erosion, cracking, and other damage, sparking a movement to preserve them before their loss to history. Angel Castaño, who heads the local cultural association, told The Local that the monument was located in one of the few spots in the river that were shallow enough to cross, and that it may have served an economic purpose in addition to its religious significance. But nobody knows for sure what the site's significance and use were, and the Spanish government doesn't appear to have any plans to protect its historical integrity. Unfortunately, it appears as though it's only a matter of time before the dolmens are destroyed completely. 2. The North Alabama. In 2022, the part of the Missouri River that runs through Nebraska and South Dakota reached its lowest level in years, revealing a long-forgotten 19th century steamboat wreck. Known as the North Alabama, the 220-ton vessel was sailing from Sioux City, Iowa to Yellowstone County, Montana in 1870 when it sprang a leak near Goat Island. The boat got caught on a log protruding from the river bottom, tearing a 2-by-8-foot gash in the hull. Crew members salvaged what they could of the flour, whiskey, and other supplies that it was carrying to miners in the Rocky Mountains before the boat went down. The captain died in the disaster, but everyone else survived without injuries. The wreck reappeared for the first time in 1904 and has been seen a handful of times since, but its most recent appearance exposed much more of the ship than usual. Explorers were quick to notice that the crew had managed to remove a lot of the cargo, making it impossible to definitely identify the ship as the North America. Around 400 steamboats sank in the Missouri River between 1819 and 1895 under similar circumstances. As the summers continue to get drier, more of these wrecks are likely to appear. 1. Ancient Norse village and bridge. During the 1950s, an ancient Norse hamlet called Batings was flooded as part of a new reservoir in West Yorkshire, England. When Britain was struck by a major heat wave in 2022, the government supplied more water than usual to residents. Between the increased usage and the perilously dry conditions, the Batings Reservoir quickly shrank, leaving behind an eerie moonscape in areas that were once completely submerged. The ruins of the ancient village also appeared, along with a centuries-old packhorse bridge that's normally completely underwater. It wasn't the first time a drought revealed the former settlement. The site was exposed in 1989 when the body of 23-year-old Lawrence Winstanley was found among the ruins. He was last seen a year earlier at a pub, and his remains were held in place by a pickaxe. Winstanley was shot in the head, and the murder remains unsolved to this day. Around the same time the ruins of Bating emerged in 2022, another ancient village appeared in a drying reservoir in North Yorkshire. Known as West End, the small settlement was built around a flax mill. By the time the government made plans to flood it and create the Thruss Cross Reservoir in the 1960s, the flax industry was declining and the village was derelict. After being told to evacuate, the small number of remaining residents packed their most important belongings and left. When West End reappeared during the drought, the remains of its mill, several building foundations, and the stumps of trees that were felled decades ago were visible. The site drew curious visitors, but authorities were quick to warn people against entering the dried-up reservoir, claiming that doing so is dangerous and potentially life-threatening.
3. Pine Gap. During the late 1960s, the US and Australia entered an agreement to establish a joint defense space research facility. The way officials described it to the public made it sound like a research facility, but its real purpose was to monitor Cold War adversaries of the West through satellite surveillance. Located deep in the outback of Central Australia outside Alice Springs, operations at Pine Gap began in 1970. The exact nature of the work done there was kept under tight wraps from day one and remains highly classified to this day. The base's remote location, far away from where any spy ships can intercept signals, only adds to the mystery surrounding it. In 1999, the Australian Senate called on intelligence expert Desmond Ball to provide an outline of Pine Gap after the government refused to give details about intelligence gathering activities at the base. According to his team's findings, Pine Gap started out with 2 antennas and around 400 employees. It underwent a noticeable expansion after the Cold War, when operations shifted from nuclear treaty monitoring and missile launch detection to primarily serving the US military's warfighting interests. In the early 90s, there were more than 600 people working at Pine Gap, and by 1999, the site had grown to include 18 antennas. Today, the site is operated by more than 800 employees from various American and Australian intelligence groups, including the US Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, the US National Security Agency, NSA, and the US National Reconnaissance Office, NRO. As of 2016, experts had identified at least 46 antenna systems that performed various roles in collecting information. Throughout its more than 50 years of operation, Pine Gap has become a source of controversy among Australians. In a report, Ball and his colleagues described the antennas at the base as a powerful political symbol that represent either the promise of enduring alliance protection or the loss of national autonomy. Professor Richard Tanter, who works as a research associate for the security research organization Nautilus, shed light on these concerns in a 2016 interview with ABC Australia. He described Pine Gap as one of America's most important intelligence operations, which raises concerns that it could be a target among US adversaries. Tanter encouraged the public to start considering and discussing its impact on Australia's national security and whether it falls in line with the country's obligations under international law. Some of the controversies surrounding the base are reflected in the 6-part political drama Pine Gap, which debuted in 2018. Created by Netflix and ABC, the storyline is considered fictional, but was influenced by real-life insight from NSA veteran David Rosenberg, who worked at the base for nearly 2 decades from 1990 to 2008. For those hoping to learn more about what goes on at Pine Gap, the future isn't very promising. Operations remain highly classified, and anyone who's curious enough to try gaining a first-hand look at the site is unlikely to get anywhere near it without encountering security personnel. In 2014, Australian photographer Christian Lionel Ruff became one of the few people to get close enough to take detailed photos of the base. He did so illegally, and for 2 years afterwards he held off on publishing the images, which is also against the law. Lionel Ruff ultimately decided to release the photos in the name of public interest. One of them was featured in the 2018 Alice Prize exhibition, which is held 11 miles outside the base in the town of Alice Springs. ABC Australia travelled there to get reactions from residents and were met with a variety of viewpoints. Local artist Robin Delaney commented on how the image gave outsiders a rare look at Pine Gap, adding that the base has been there forever, yet nobody knows much about it. Another exhibition visitor told the news outlet that she participated in a women's demonstration to shut Pine Gap down in 1983 and couldn't believe that the photo won a prize. One man said that he thinks the base serves a purpose and was reluctant to buy into the controversy, even though its activities are kept secret from the public. What are your thoughts on Pine Gap? Let us know in the comments below, but first, be sure to subscribe. 2. Portdown. To counter the increased threat of chemical warfare that came during World War I, the British government built a chemicals weapons testing station in the remote countryside of Wiltshire, England. Nestled among 7,000 acres of rolling hills, it opened in 1916 as the War Department Experimental Station and was soon renamed the Royal Engineers Experimental Station. Today, it's known as Portdown. In 1930, Britain ratified the Geneva Protocol, which banned the offensive use of chemical warfare agents. Under the treaty's terms, chemicals could only be used in retaliation. But as international tensions heightened in the years leading up to World War II, the government began to allow offensive chemical warfare research and the production of war reserve stocks of chemical warfare agents. Throughout the First and Second World Wars, scientists from Portdown experimented on mustard gas, nerve agents including sarin, and biological weapons including anthrax and botulinum toxin. After World War II, research at the base focused heavily on nerve agents. tests were carried out on human subjects, leading to allegations of unethical experimentation that remain shrouded in controversy to this day. The test subjects were recruited as volunteers, but there are lingering suspicions the participants were misinformed about the nature of the tests and the health risks involved. Over 3,400 people participated in nerve gas experiments between 1945 and 1989. In 1953, a young soldier named Ronald Madison was one of nearly 400 servicemen who took part in a test to determine how much nerve gas it took to incapacitate or kill someone when applied to bare skin or clothing. Scientists tested 3 different nerve gases with the goal of calculating deadly doses based on the effects of sublethal doses on the body. During the experiment, Madison became gravely ill. He collapsed, went deaf, convulsed, gasped for air, and then lost consciousness in what turned out to be an excruciating death. Government officials warned his father against repeating anything he learned at an inquest hearing into Madison's death, and returned the young man's body to his family in a steel coffin with the lid bolted down. They also harvested a large number of tissue samples for future experiments without the family's knowledge or consent. In another early experiment at the facility, 56 men were sent into a chamber and exposed to low concentrations of sarin. They began showing signs of poisoning after about 20 minutes and suffered from blurred and darkened vision for up to 5 days. Scientists also subjected participants to repeated poisoning and heavy doses to observe the physical effects of chemical agents, as well as the psychological and intellectual impacts. The facility's research on chemical agents was eventually pushed to the wayside by the development of nuclear weapons, but for many of the human guinea pigs who participated in the chemical experiments, the psychological effects were lasting. During the 1990s, the media increased its coverage of the topic, with many former test subjects claiming that they thought they were participating in an experiment on the common cold when they were unknowingly being subjected to hazardous substances. A second inquest into Madison's death was opened in 2004. 4 years later, Britain's Ministry of Defence paid out £3 million to 360 veterans who participated in experiments at Portdown. But the government has never admitted liability and adamantly denies that the staff members at Portdown failed to obtain informed consent from test participants. Although some light has been shed on the site's controversial past, most of what's gone on there over the last century remains a closely guarded secret. Portdown is still in use today. It employs around 3,000 scientists who work to develop better ways of protecting troops and civilians against attacks. Much of their research still revolves around biological and chemical agents and includes experiments on animals. Human volunteers also participate in studies, which are overseen and approved by Ministry of Defence research ethics committees. The Defence Science and Technology Laboratory flatly denies rumours that Portdown houses the remains of a UFO crash, stating on the UK government website, "No aliens either alive or dead have ever been taken to Portdown or any other DSTL site." The agency also denies growing marijuana at the base. 1. South China Sea bases. China's wealth has skyrocketed over the last few decades, giving the country a major foothold in world politics and enabling the expansion of its military interests and capabilities. Under its current president, Xi Jinping, China's armed forces have undergone massive build-up and modernization schemes. China ranks second only to the US when it comes to military spending. Many of these developments and activities are being carried out in secrecy, but it's clear that one of the country's biggest priorities lies in its territorial claims to the South China Sea. China claims to own nearly the entire sea, where at least 6 other countries have made overlapping ownership claims, including the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei, and Taiwan. In 2014, the Chinese military began turning reefs and sandbars into man-made islands and building heavily fortified military bases on them. Many of these clandestine bases are far out into the sea and away from China's shoreline, sparking fears that the sea's use as a crucial global shipping route could be threatened. There are also concerns that the country will capitalize on the natural resources in the waters surrounding the islands, including fish and oil. The far-flung island bases are equipped with runways, missiles, and weapon systems, giving Beijing expanded control over the region. In early 2022, The Guardian reported that at least 3 of the man-made islands located in the Spratly archipelago were fully militarized, with anti-ship and anti-aircraft missile systems, laser and jamming equipment, and fighter jets. In response to the seemingly aggressive move, the US and its allies have stepped up their military patrols of the area by sailing naval ships past the isolated outposts. China claims that the patrols violated sovereignty, while the countries carrying out the patrols maintain that they're enforcing the right of free passage in international waters. In 2018, BBC journalists flew over some of the bases in a US military plane. During the flight, the pilots received radio warnings from Chinese callers who accused the plane of illegally entering China's territory and ordered the aircraft to vacate the area. This happened again in early 2022, when an American military aircraft flew over the Spratly Islands with AP journalists on board. In one of several radio messages, the caller warned, "China has sovereignty over the Spratly Islands, as well as surrounding maritime areas. Stay away immediately to avoid misjudgment." The pilot calmly replied that he was conducting lawful military activities beyond the national airspace of any coastal state, and that his right to do so was guaranteed by international law. He continued to fly over the Spratly Islands, where the crew observed multiple hangars, runways, warehouses, multi-story buildings, and other features of a fully established base. They also counted more than 40 ships anchored nearby. US Indo-Pacific Commander Admiral John C. Aquilino told The Guardian that any military or civilian plane flying over the South China Sea could easily come within range of the island's missile systems. He described the establishment of the bases as an aggressive move, despite Beijing's claims that its military activities in the South China Sea are purely defensive. While these sites certainly pose an international threat, their effectiveness in the event of actual combat and ability to defend themselves in an attack are highly questionable. In 2020, the Beijing-based Naval and Merchant Ships magazine published a report highlighting the natural weaknesses of isolated bases that are far from both the mainland and each other. In the event of a military engagement, these outposts are far from any help they might need, and their solitary placement makes them vulnerable to ambush. And the distance between most of the islands makes it costly and impractical for fighter jets to travel between the bases. The report speculated that the base's shelters most likely have very limited protections from an airstrike. Defense expert Malcolm Davis told CNN that the South China Sea's harsh environmental conditions, including saltwater corrosion and poor weather, would make it difficult to store aircraft and other machinery necessary for defending against an attack. Hopefully, the disputed territorial claims never result in a direct military engagement between China and any other country. After telling CNN about the radio warnings his plane received while flying over the Spratly Islands, Aquilino stressed the importance of seeking peaceful resolutions to the territorial conflicts between China and other countries. But if it came down to a fight, the remote bases would probably be among the first targets of an attacking force. While they've accomplished China's job of trying to legitimize the reach of its ownership claims, they're impractical for long-term use or use in actual conflict. Whether China will continue to build these sites in its quest for maritime dominance remains to be seen. Thanks for watching. Do you know any other secret military bases that belong in a video like this? Tell us in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.